Before humans took their first steps, the Earth belonged to others. Invisible empires of bacteria ruled the oceans. Soft-bodied beings shaped the first ecosystems, and armored predators turned the seas into battlegrounds. Forests thundered with amphibians the size of crocodiles, while insects and reptiles forged kingdoms in air and swamp. Age after age, one dynasty replaced another, each rewriting the laws of survival. From microbes to mammoths, the throne of life has never stood empty. So who truly ruled this planet before us? Journey into the forgotten reigns of Earth's earliest kings, lords of the microverse. The age of bacteria. At first, there was nothing to see. No forests, no beasts, not even the whisper of wind across rock. Yet beneath the waves of a planet newly cooled, something had begun to move. The silence left behind by molten earth filled with invisible activity, a slow alchemy that turned chaos into persistence. In those shallow, mineral-rich seas, molecules met and joined, encased within delicate membranes that divided the inner world from the outer. The first cells were not complex, nor aware, but they were enduring. They replicated, divided, and multiplied, leaving behind the faintest traces of carbon in rocks now more than 3.8 billion years old. Within shallow seas near the margins of ancient continents, life found shelter in warmth and chemical abundance. Microfossils preserved in the apex chert of Western Australia, dated to 3.5 billion years ago, record the first microbial mats communities of single-celled organisms that clung to sediments and built layered structures known as stromatolites. Today, similar structures still form in Shark Bay, Australia, with each bubble of trapped gas serving as a living echo of Earth's oldest civilizations. Through isotope analysis, scientists have identified a distinct biological fingerprint within these ancient rocks. Lighter carbon isotopes that betray the hand of metabolism rather than the blind chemistry of stone. In darkness, another kind of life ruled, thriving without sunlight or air. Deep beneath the surface, in hydrothermal vent systems and anoxic sediments, microbes learned to feed on minerals. Methanogens drew energy from hydrogen and carbon dioxide, exhaling methane as their waste. Sulfate reducers turned the chemistry of decay into life, transforming sulfur compounds into energy. These were the architects of invisible industry, cycling elements through the planet's crust long before plants or animals appeared. Through photosynthesis, a new power emerged. Some bacteria, ancestors of the cyanobacteria known today, captured sunlight using pigments that absorb specific wavelengths of energy. At first, their photosynthesis produced no oxygen, relying instead on hydrogen sulfide or iron as donors. Over time, a crucial mutation transformed this process. Water itself became the source of electrons. With this shift, oxygen began to flow into the world. The reaction was simple but revolutionary: light split water, releasing oxygen as waste. Then came oxygen, not as a gentle arrival, but as a catastrophe. To most existing life, oxygen was a toxin, a molecule that tore apart delicate biochemistry. The atmosphere, once reducing and protective, began to change its character. Iron dissolved in seawater, reacted with the new oxygen to form rust, which settled to the ocean floor in thick bands of iron oxide. These banded iron formations, still visible in places like the Canadian Shield and Western Australia, record the moment the planet's chemistry flipped. Around 2.4 billion years ago, this great oxygenation event reshaped everything. Oceans cleared, methane levels fell, and the skies turned from orange haze to a pale blue clarity. The air that once sustained microbial dominion had become their executioner. Over eons, the world shivered beneath this transformation. Oxygen stripped away greenhouse gases that had kept the planet warm, plunging Earth into what may have been its first global glaciation. Ice advanced from the poles, turning oceans into frozen deserts where only the hardiest cells could persist. Yet even in this crisis, life adapted. Some microbes learned to neutralize oxygen's dangers by evolving enzymes that captured and stored its energy safely. This innovation, aerobic respiration, unlocked a 100-fold increase in efficiency. What had been poison became power. By transforming poison into purpose, bacteria redefined the planet's metabolism. Oxygen accumulated in the air and seeped into stone, oxidizing minerals, altering soil, and setting the stage for the chemistry that would make complex life possible. Cyanobacterial colonies expanded across continental shelves, forming vast mats that stretched for kilometers. Their photosynthetic activity altered global carbon cycles, drawing down atmospheric carbon dioxide and shaping climate regulation for the first time. In essence, bacteria became planetary engineers, modifying every surface they touched. For the first time, the biosphere and the geosphere became inseparable. The rock cycle, once driven solely by heat and erosion, now carries the signatures of life. Isotopic ratios in ancient sediments reveal that biological processes influence the weathering of minerals, accelerating the formation of clays and the burial of carbonates. Microbes infiltrated the crust, living kilometers below the surface, feeding on chemical gradients between rock and water. These hidden populations, still present today, may outweigh all plants and animals combined, a living memory of an age when the unseen world was the only world. In darkness, away from sunlight and oxygen, other bacterial lineages persisted as they always had. Some continued to harvest energy from sulfur, others from iron or ammonia. Extremophiles, as we call them now, colonized environments of boiling acid and frozen brine. They endured pressures that would crush a submarine and temperatures that would boil metal. The diversity of microbial strategies became the blueprint for all future evolution. An endless experiment running in every corner of the planet. Within these communities, cooperation and competition interwove. Some bacteria began to exchange genetic material, not through inheritance but through direct transfer, a process known as horizontal gene transfer. This innovation blurred the boundaries of species, allowing new traits to spread like wildfire. It was not a linear descent, but a collective invention, a communal genome that spanned oceans and continents. The concept of individuality, so central to higher life, did not yet exist. The biosphere was a single, murmuring entity. As oxygen continued to accumulate, it reacted with ultraviolet light to form ozone, wrapping the planet in a protective veil. This thin layer, high in the stratosphere, shielded the surface from lethal radiation and allowed shallower waters to become habitable. For the first time, light could reach nearshore microbial mats without destruction. The air was becoming a medium for evolution, rather than a barrier to it. Over time, the invisible rulers of the Earth diversified into an unimaginable variety. By 1.8 billion years ago, bacteria had colonized every environment from the freezing poles to volcanic springs, from deep sediments to floating oceanic colonies. Their metabolic pathways defined the chemistry of the world, producing nitrogen, methane, sulfur, and oxygen in balanced flux. Fossilized stromatolites from this period exhibit rhythmic growth patterns that mirror tidal cycles, indicating that even bacteria responded to the planet's pulse. The age of invisible empires endured for nearly 3 billion years, longer than any kingdom that would follow. Bacteria shaped the continents, wrote their story in stone, and breathed the first true atmosphere into being. Every living creature to come, every leaf, every fin, every lung would inherit their chemistry and their resilience. Yet in their triumph lay the seed of change. The oxygen that sustained new life would also challenge its creators, pushing the world toward a new horizon of complexity. In the quiet after this transformation, the Earth waited once more. The seas, now rich with oxygen and trace metals, shimmered under a bluer sky. Within their depths, new forms prepared to emerge, drawn by the energy their ancestors had unleashed. Life, having mastered the invisible, was ready to take shape to build bodies, to see, to move. Architects of the deep. The Ediacaran experiment. Beneath oceans lit by dim sun and drifting sediment, a quiet transformation was unfolding. After billions of years ruled by single-celled monarchs, Earth's surface had changed. Oxygen, once a toxin, had begun to lace the water with breath. The seas grew clearer, their chemistry softer, their temperature more forgiving. In this calm after planetary tumult, the first shadows of complexity began to gather. They rose not with fanfare or violence, but with the slow patience of chemistry learning new rhythms. The deep floor became a canvas, and upon it, life began to paint with form. From the mineral planes of microbial mats, new architectures stirred not creatures in any familiar sense, but patterns made flesh. Sheets and fronds and quilted forms spread outward, like silent gardens, anchored in the soft sediment. These were the Ediacaran beings, born in the long twilight between simplicity and sensation. Fossils tell us they appeared about 575 million years ago, in the wake of the Gasquier's glaciation, when melting ice released oxygen into the ocean depth. The timing was no coincidence. Oxygen allowed cells to cooperate, to divide labor, to build bodies larger than the microscopic. For the first time, life could sculpt itself in 3 dimensions. They had no eyes, no mouths, no hunger we can recognize. They did not crawl or swim. Instead, they rested on the seafloor, absorbing nutrients through their skin or filtering microscopic particles from the water. Some, like Dickinsonia, stretched oval and ribbed, resembling a segmented leaf pressed into stone. Others, such as Charnia and Rangia, grew in fractal elegance, branching repeatedly like trees of living lace. Their bodies followed mathematical precision, each pattern repeating at smaller scales, as though geometry itself had taken breath. Scientists believe this fractal growth allowed efficient nutrient absorption in a world without complex organs. Soft as shadows, these early organisms covered the ocean bottom in colonies. Entire plains shimmered with their quilted surfaces, motionless yet alive, exchanging chemicals and light in a quiet communion. In the mistaken point formation of Newfoundland, fine volcanic ash preserved their outlines in exquisite detail, freezing entire communities in place. There, on rock slabs dating to 565 million years ago, paleontologists read the fossilized whispers of a world that no longer exists. Each imprint marks an organism that never left descendants, an evolutionary path that reached out and dissolved. Modern science has struggled to place them in the tree of life. Were they animals, fungi, or something altogether different? Their anatomy offers no clear answers. Sprigina, a creature with a faint suggestion of a head and body segments, hints at mobility but lacks any trace of limbs or mouth. Some researchers once thought it an ancestor of worms or arthropods. Others now see it as an independent lineage, a failed experiment in multicellularity. The diversity of these forms, discs, fronds, ribbons, spirals, reveals an era of evolutionary openness, when biology itself was experimenting with the idea of form. Fossil beds in the Flinders Ranges of South Australia tell another part of the story. There, in rocks 500 million years old, entire communities lie preserved under thin films of clay and sand. By mapping their spatial arrangement, scientists found that Ediacaran organisms preferred certain depths and light conditions, forming distinct ecological zones. Some species clustered together, others avoided competition by spacing themselves apart, evidence of the world's first ecological strategies. It was a silent choreography written in the sediments, revealing that even without nerves or motion, life was already shaping ecosystems. Geochemistry adds another layer of revelation. Carbon and sulfur isotopes from Ediacaran rocks suggest fluctuating oxygen levels that may have stressed these delicate organisms. At first, the rise of oxygen allowed them to flourish, but later, instability, perhaps triggered by changes in ocean circulation, may have sealed their fate. The transition from oxygen-rich shallows to anoxic depths would have created narrow habitable zones. Within these limits, the Ediacaran biota built their fleeting dominion, suspended between sufficiency and suffocation. In their absence, the record speaks louder than their presence. When the Cambrian explosion followed only tens of millions of years later, almost none of the Ediacaran body plans survived. They vanished without a trace, replaced by creatures with mouths, shells, and predatory intent. Some scientists propose that their stillness was their undoing. When the first grazers evolved simple worms scraping microbial mats, they destroyed the foundation of the Ediacaran world. The stable, film-covered seafloor they depended upon disappeared, and with it, the last of their kind. Yet others believe their extinction was more gradual, a quiet fading, rather than a cataclysm. As life diversified and oxygen levels continued to climb, ecosystems became more dynamic. Sediments churned, currents strengthened, and the passive existence of the Ediacarans was no longer enough. The shift from microbial mat communities to active food webs marked a revolution in energy flow. What once was static became kinetic. The world that had birthed them no longer existed, and so they returned to silence. The Ediacaran biota remained one of the most enigmatic chapters in Earth's story, a gallery of forms both alien and familiar, hinting at possibilities never realized. Some paleontologists now use 3D scanning and computed tomography to model their growth and spatial relationships, revealing how fluid dynamics shaped their environment. Others analyze molecular biomarkers, searching for chemical traces of lipids or pigments. Each discovery refines the boundary between speculation and understanding, showing that these beings were not primitive failures, but crucial prototypes. They proved that cooperation between cells could yield complexity, that structure itself could become an ecological force. Something was stirring beneath a preparation, perhaps, for teeth and speed. The oceans that had cradled stillness would soon erupt with motion and conflict. The geometry of life, once delicate and decorative, would become a weapon and a defense. But for a brief epoch, before predation and panic defined survival, Earth belonged to quiet architects. Their reign was not measured in dominance, but in imagination, a proof that life's first dream of form was as mysterious as creation itself. And in the fading light of their era, the world drew a breath it did not yet know it would need, readying itself for the coming storm of evolution. The reign of claws. The Cambrian explosion. It began with light not gentle or still, but fractured and alive. Sunbeams pierced the shallows, scattering across a world that no longer slept. Shapes stirred where once there had been only drifting shadows. Muscles flexed, shells gleamed, and in the shimmer of motion, hunger took form. Sight met movement, movement met fear, and evolution found its weapon. The long calm of the Ediacaran had ended. The age of claws had arrived. The Cambrian seas were arenas of invention. Around 541 million years ago, biology underwent its greatest acceleration, a sudden, irreversible burst known as the Cambrian explosion. Within a geological blink of roughly 20 million years, almost every major animal body plan appeared: segmented worms, armored arthropods, soft-bodied predators with grasping limbs, and early chordates that hinted at vertebrates to come. Trilobites, with their mirrored rows of eyes and mineralized shells, scuttled across the sea floor in vast herds. Nearby, spiny worms called hallucigenia crawled upside down, their backs lined with needle-like spines that glinted like glass. Every grain of sand became part of a battlefield where survival demanded speed, vision, and adaptation. The fossil record of this revolution, captured most vividly in the Burgess Shale of British Columbia, reveals the intricate choreography of this new world. Preserved in exquisite detail, even soft tissues, gills, eyes, and digestive tracts survived as carbon films pressed between shale layers. Among them lies Anomalocaris, one of Earth's earliest apex predators, over a meter long, armed with spiked appendages and circular jaws ringed with serrated plates. It swam with undulating lobes, hunting trilobites in sudden bursts. In its time, it was unstoppable, an alien monarch of the primordial sea. Its existence marks one of evolution's great turning points, the arrival of active predation, the first moment when fear became an evolutionary force. Eyes, too, were born in this era, not as vague patches of light sensitivity, but as complex organs with lenses, corneas, and depth perception. Fossil evidence from trilobite exoskeletons shows compound eyes containing thousands of calcite lenses, each capturing a fragment of reality. The ability to see transformed behavior, driving the evolution of both pursuit and evasion. Prey no longer waited. They hid, burrowed, or armored themselves. Hunters no longer drifted. They strategized. The world that had once evolved by chemical and structural chance now evolved by decision and response. With predation came defense, and with defense came diversity. The Cambrian oceans were filled with shells of calcium carbonate, spines of silica, and exoskeletons of chitin. The Earth's geochemistry shifted accordingly. Oxygen levels rose, and calcium ions circulated more freely through seawater, enabling new biological architecture. Trilobite carapaces, brachiopod shells, and the first reef-building sponges began altering the seafloor itself, creating layered ecosystems that supported yet more complexity. For the first time, life reshaped its environment not passively, but through the arms race of survival. Yet even amid this frenzy, there were mysteries creatures that defied every known category. The soft-bodied Opabinia, with 5 eyes and a flexible proboscis tipped with claws, seems almost designed to perplex. Wiwaxia, covered in overlapping scales and dagger-like spines, blurred the line between mollusk and worm. Each discovery, from the Burgess Shale and Chengjiang biota in China, reveals a branch of life that both connects and confuses the evolutionary tree. These forms remind us that the Cambrian explosion was not a single event of perfection, but an experiment conducted on a planetary scale, a billion failures for every lasting design. Geological data suggests that this biological renaissance followed a period of global instability. The end of the Ediacaran had seen fluctuating oxygen levels, glaciations, and the breakup of the supercontinent Rodinia, which flooded continental margins and created shallow seas rich in nutrients. These coastal shelves became cradles of innovation, where increased oxygen allowed for higher metabolic rates, and where silica and calcium accumulated for shell construction. Radiometric dating and isotopic analyses show that carbon and sulfur cycles reached new equilibria during this time, linking chemical shifts directly to evolutionary bursts. Life did not emerge from nowhere, it emerged from stress. As ecosystems diversified, so did the rhythms of life itself. The first food webs formed, algae feeding small grazers, grazers feeding predators, predators leaving behind detritus that nourished microbial mats below. Trace fossils record the tracks and burrows of organisms exploring sediment surfaces, signaling not only locomotion, but intention. These simple movements mark the dawn of behavior of instinct encoded into biology. Each trail in ancient rock represents not just an organism, but a moment of choice, an expression of life asserting its will against the inert. Yet for all its innovation, the Cambrian world was fragile. Many of its experimental species vanished as quickly as they appeared, victims of ecological competition or abrupt climate shifts. The fossil record narrows near the end of the period, suggesting that selective pressures intensified. Those that endured trilobites, early mollusks, primitive chordates, laid the foundations for future empires. From Picaia, a small worm-like swimmer with a notochord would eventually descend the vertebrates, a lineage that would one day walk, fly, and rule. The Cambrian was not merely an explosion of forms, it was the ignition of destiny. In the layered strata of shale, scientists have measured the tempo of that ignition. Molecular clock analyses and fossil calibration suggest that genetic diversification may have begun tens of millions of years before its visible fossil bloom, hidden in microscopic forms awaiting environmental opportunity. Once oxygen thresholds were crossed and ecosystems stabilized, these latent genes found expression. DNA itself, ancient, restless, and patient, had been preparing for this moment since the first bacterial symbioses billions of years earlier. The Cambrian explosion was not sudden creation, but the culmination of deep evolutionary potential waiting for light, oxygen, and hunger to align. The seas of the Cambrian shimmered like no world before them. Coral-like reefs rose from silt. Plankton filled the upper waters, turning sunlight into the first global food chain. In those clear, shallow zones, evolution moved visibly, sculpting anatomy and instinct in real time. A new order had emerged, built not on peace or permanence, but on pressure, a dynamic that would echo through every epoch to come. And as trilobites marched across the seabed and Anomalocaris glided above, another revolution was quietly preparing itself. In tidal flats and coastal shallows, mats of algae clung to rock, trapping sediment and holding moisture between tides. Simple worms wriggled through the wet film, learning to tolerate air for moments at a time. The first steps toward land were being rehearsed in silence. The struggle that had begun in water was already seeking its next stage. The empire of Finns, lords of the ancient seas. The seas grew vast again, their power unquestioned. Beneath the surface, evolution no longer scrambled for invention, it refined, turning experiment into strength, chance into purpose. Where once the oceans had swarmed with soft-bodied forms, now muscle and armor ruled. Titans of cartilage and bone moved like living fortresses, masters of a world sculpted by current and hunger. The age of Finns had begun. By the middle of the Devonian, 400 million years ago, Earth's waters had become an empire of predators. The continents of Laurussia and Gondwana sprawled across a warm planet whose atmosphere brimmed with oxygen, feeding coral reefs that spread for thousands of kilometers. Sunlight filtered through shallow shelves where forests of stromatoporoid sponges and coral towers created labyrinths of life. Here, the seas were thick with motion, every ripple concealing hunters and the hunted. Among these masterpieces swam Dunkleosteus terrelli, the armoured monarch of the Devonian world. Reaching 10 meters in length, its head was encased in interlocking plates of bone that glinted like forged metal. It possessed no true teeth, only sharpened edges of armour that sliced together with forces exceeding 6,000 newtons, strong enough to crush shell and bone alike. Its skull hinged open with the speed of a striking catapult, a feat revealed by digital modelling of fossil joints. It was evolution's first true apex predator, a creature that embodied the refinement of violence. But dominance was never solitary. While placoderms like Dunkleosteus ruled the coastal shelves, a new lineage was emerging in deeper waters. The first sharks, Cladocelas, cut through the ocean like an idea made of muscle, its body built for speed rather than armour. Cartilage replaced bone, lightening the frame and granting an agility no plated fish could match. Fossil impressions show the smooth outlines of its body, devoid of scales, and fin spines that suggest precision control in the water column. 6 or 7 gill slits opened along each side, feeding oxygen into a body that could swim without rest. For every predator, evolution forged a response. The armored Bothrialepis scoured the sea floor, encased in bone that turned its entire front half into a shell of defense. Fossils found from Scotland to Australia show that they traveled in great numbers, suggesting both social behavior and migration through shallow waters. They were slow, awkward, and resolute, filtering mud for food, while their tails propelled them with gentle sweeps. In their stillness, one sees a strategy as successful as speed. Above them swam the first truly modern, bony fishes, creatures with scales, like glass, and skeletons hardened with calcium phosphate. Unlike their armored ancestors, these fish carried within their bodies an innovation that would change the future of life: the swim bladder. Once a primitive lung for gulping air, it evolved into a chamber of buoyancy, allowing balance between light and gravity. With this, movement became art. Schools of ray-finned fish shimmered through the shallows, adjusting depth with a flicker, filling the water with glints of reflected sunday. Their agility was poetry written in physics. The ocean's surface world was as alive as its depths. Coral reefs became sprawling metropolises of biodiversity, housing trilobites, ammonoids, crinoids, and crustaceans in complex webs of interdependence. Isotope evidence from Devonian sediments reveals rising photosynthetic productivity, meaning more oxygen dissolved in water, and with it, more energy to fuel motion. These reefs formed the earliest ecosystems comparable in complexity to today's tropical seas, complete with specialized niches and symbiotic alliances. For the first time, balance had replaced frenzy. The predators that swam here did not simply chase, they patrolled, surveyed, and owned the water. The Devonian Ocean was no longer a place of chaos, but of law, a hierarchy maintained by strength and speed. Cartilaginous skeletons introduced a new rule: flexibility could defeat armor. Evolution was now a sculptor, not an inventor. In this world, even the land began to stir. Along the coastlines, rooted plants spread their green filigree across mudflats, stabilizing sediments and enriching the air with oxygen. These changes rippled back into the seas, altering chemistry and spawning new habitats of brackish shallows. It was here that certain lobe-finned fish creatures, like Estenopteron and Panderichthes, found themselves half swimming, half walking, using their muscular fins to push through thick weeds and shallow pools. Their bones, heavier and jointed, hinted at a new direction in design. Evolution was experimenting again, but now the laboratory extended beyond the tides. In these transitional forms, scientists read the first drafts of vertebrate conquest on land. The bones of the pectoral fin were homologous with the humerus, radius, and ulna of a limb, a pattern repeated through deep time. Inside those bones, channels once filled with blood and marrow whisper the story of resilience, the preparation for weight, for gravity, for a world not cushioned by water. In fossils from Arctic Canada, Tiktaalik rosier bridges this divide, bearing both gills and lungs, both fin rays and wrist bones. Its discovery in 2004 confirmed what had long been suspected, that the empire of fins would not remain confined to the sea. But under the surface of its triumphs, the Devonian trembled. Layers of black shale tell of oceanic anoxia periods when oxygen vanished from the water, killing countless species. Entire lineages of armored fish disappeared, their dominance ending as abruptly as it had begun. Perhaps volcanism, climate shifts, or changes in plant cover drove these collapses. Perhaps the oceans themselves became victims of their own fertility. Whatever the cause, each extinction cleared the stage for those who could adapt, granting opportunity to the resilient and the bold. Through it all, the ocean endured as the heart of life. Cartilage and bone, fin and muscle, armor and speed, each a testament to nature's balance between invention and restraint. When we study the fossilized jaws of Dunkleosteus or the delicate rays of ancient fish, we see the logic of a planet learning how to move. It was here, beneath Devonian waves, that the architecture of every swimmer, every flyer, and every stepper first took shape. And in the shallows, where light met silt and the tide drew back to reveal damp earth, something lifted its body toward the air. The empire of fins had reached its horizon. The next dominion waited beyond the surface, in a realm of weight and breath, where fins would learn the courage to become limbs. Titans of the swamp. The age of amphibians. Steam rose from the shallows, and the air was heavy, strange, and filled with a scent of wet earth. Each breath was a wager, each step a defiance of weight. Around them, ferns towered like cathedrals, their fronds dripping with the remnants of night rain. The world of water faded into echo as life pressed itself against the surface of the land, clumsy but determined, seeking a new dominion under a different sky. This was the Carboniferous, a time when Earth breathed in oxygen more deeply than ever before. Across the continents, swamps spread in vast mosaics, pooling beneath trees that reached heights never before seen on land. The planet had grown green and humid, wrapped in forests of lycopods and horsetails whose trunks rose as high as 20 meters. Here, the amphibians ruled inheritors of the lobe-finned fish who first tested the weight of the world, and in them the sea's legacy found its strength. Some still clung to the water, their skins slick and porous, their young hatched in shallow pools that mirrored the old ocean. Others roamed farther, their limbs stronger, their ribs broader, their lungs able to draw the thick steaming air. Among them walked Eriops, the lumbering giant of the Carboniferous waterways, its broad skull and tooth-lined jaws made for ambush beneath still ponds. Fossil remains from Texas and Europe show bones dense with muscle attachments, each limb ending in stout digits that could press against the mud with force enough to drive a body the size of a crocodile. In these creatures, the old and the new coexisted. Their hearts still beat to the rhythm of the tides, yet their eyes had learned to search above the surface. Amphibians like Crassigyrinus and Proterogyrinus were long and serpentine, their limbs reduced to paddles, their lives balanced between two worlds that no longer easily met. But others, like Eriops and Cacops, were creatures of the shallows, evolving thicker skin, heavier bones, and lungs that could endure the stagnant heat. The swamps themselves were alive in ways the seas had never been. Roots coiled beneath the surface, binding the ground together while releasing moisture into the air. Great trees called lepidodendrons rose with bark patterned like scales, while calamites, giant ancestors of the modern horsetail, formed dense thickets along the floodplains. These forests produced so much biomass that when they died, their trunks fell into the water and were buried in anoxic mud, forming the vast coal seams that power our civilization today. Everywhere, adaptation wrote itself in muscle and bone. Fossilized trackways from Nova Scotia and Poland show the imprints of broad feet splaying through soft sediment, evidence of creatures learning to bear their own weight. The shape of their limbs reveals how the bones of fish fins had transformed into the geometry of walking humerus, radius, ulna, each joint capable of resisting gravity's pull. Lungs, once primitive sacs for gulping air, evolved folds that increased surface area, allowing the blood to draw oxygen from a world no longer buoyant. Breathing itself became an act of transformation. Unlike the cold stillness of the ocean, this new realm moved with sound, the cheer of insects, the dripping of water from leaves, the slow thud of footsteps through mud. Each amphibian that moved here carried the memory of tides within its blood, yet it sought a new rhythm, one that matched the beat of rainfall and the crackle of thunder. In this age, life was not yet stable, but it was exuberant. Oxygen levels approached 35%, feeding both growth and flame. Even small wounds could fester quickly, for bacteria thrived in the heat, and so the amphibians relied on their moist skin as both armor and organ, exchanging gases through their delicate surface. They lived in constant negotiation with the land, venturing from water to hunt, then returning to lay eggs that could not yet survive without moisture. It was an imperfect conquest, yet one that proved lasting, for they had achieved something no fish ever had: the ability to look back upon the water from above. Amid these giants of swamp and reed, evolution was at work on smaller scales as well. The first insects filled the air, drawn to the abundance of decaying plants and stagnant pools. Their presence reshaped the amphibian diet and introduced new forms of predation, forcing specialization in limb, jaw, and movement. The Carboniferous forest was no longer just a home. It was a stage for interdependence, where each flutter of wings or splash of water could decide the future of a lineage. Through fossil bone and sediment, scientists have reconstructed the conditions of these early forests with astonishing precision. Stomatal densities on fossil leaves reveal atmospheric oxygen concentrations, while isotopic studies of coal layers indicate fluctuating humidity that shaped where amphibians could thrive. Paleontologists trace the diversification of early tetrapods through subtle changes in skull architecture, the position of the eyes, the curvature of the palate, and the widening of neural arches along the spine. But even as these creatures mastered both land and water, their dominion was fragile. Their skin, a living membrane, required constant moisture, and their eggs, soft and vulnerable, tied them to the wetlands that birthed them. As the Carboniferous gave way to the Permian, climate shifted and the swamps began to dry. Forests thinned, rivers changed course, and with each season of drought, the amphibians' hold on the world weakened. Fossil evidence from the late Carboniferous shows a decline in their diversity, matched by the rise of creatures better suited for dryness: reptiles, with scales that held water, eggs with shells that guarded life from the air. Still, for a time, the amphibians were kings. Their calls echoed through warm rains that fell for centuries, and their heavy bodies pressed the shape of the first footprints that would one day lead to every land creature on earth. They were bridges in flesh, linking what swam with what would walk, carrying within their bones the memory of both. When the swamps began to wither, the air grew lighter and the soil cracked beneath the heat. In the still ponds where the amphibians lingered, new forms began to stir, creatures sealed in armor, their scales glittering beneath the sunday. The reign of the soft-skinned lords was ending, and the world itself was preparing for those who would no longer need the water's comfort. The insect empires, the smallest conquerors. In the breathless stillness after the giants, the forests began to hum. It was not the heavy tread of amphibian limbs, nor the splash of scaled bodies against water. It was a lighter sound, a vibration, a tremor, a thousand-fold murmur that filled the undergrowth and climbed the trunks of the towering trees. The air itself seemed to come alive, rippling with wings that caught the sun and scattered it into shards of color. In this new realm of motion, the insects rose small, tireless, and unstoppable. They did not rule with size or strength, but with number, with adaptation, with the silent efficiency of evolution perfected in miniature. The Carboniferous world was a greenhouse of abundance. Oxygen levels soared higher than at any other time in Earth's history, thickening the air and fueling bodies far beyond modern limits. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than a falcon's patrolled the skies, their multifaceted eyes catching the shimmer of every rival. Millipedes longer than a man's height wound through the leaf litter, their armored segments glinting with dew. Cockroaches and crickets filled every crevice, eating, breeding, molting, and rebuilding their world with endless momentum. Every fallen branch became a city, every hollow log a fortress. Beneath the ferns, life multiplied with mechanical precision, and for the first time, the planet belonged to the small. The amphibians still lingered, half-lords of a fading dominion. Their eggs clung to shallow ponds where shadows thickened beneath the canopy. But even there, the insect armies encroached. Mosquito-like larvae swarmed in the same pools, competing for oxygen and light. Predatory nymphs, dragonfly young, armed with grasping jaws, lurked among reeds and snatched the offspring of creatures that once ruled the swamps. Power, it seemed, had changed hands not through battle, but through persistence. Evolution had crowned new conquerors, those who could outbreed, outfly, and outlast every giant before them. With wings came freedom. With freedom came empire. The first to master flight reshaped the balance of life itself. Hovering above the canopy, insects turned the air into a three-dimensional battlefield. They became pollinators and predators, builders and recyclers. Every beat of a wing scattered spores, transported pollen, and wove the invisible threads of ecosystems that would one day sustain forests, reptiles, and mammals alike. The biosphere learned to breathe in rhythm with them, a pulse of perpetual motion sustained by creatures smaller than a fingertip. Researchers believe that insect flight first arose around 400 million years ago, near the Devonian Carboniferous boundary, an evolutionary breakthrough unmatched in its subtlety. Their wings may have originated from gill-like structures used by aquatic ancestors to regulate heat and gas exchange, slowly transforming into aerodynamic surfaces. Fossilized forms, such as Delitzschala bitterfeldensis, one of the earliest known winged insects, offer glimpses of these pioneers suspended in ancient shale. Each discovery narrows the mystery of how Earth's smallest creatures became its first masters of the air. Their forms were exquisite in function. The exoskeleton, both armor and architecture, allowed pressure and power without collapse. Compound eyes multiplied sight into mosaics of motion, a sensory revolution that mapped the world in fractal detail. Wings thin, veined membranes stretched between evolved limbs generated lift with astonishing efficiency. They were organic machines before machines had names. Fossilized impressions in ancient shale record each filament and joint delicate traces of bodies that once ruled the wind. Through them, the story of innovation unfolds not in muscle or bone, but in chitin and air. Where light could not reach, another civilization thrived. Termites and ants, in their earliest ancestral forms, began to practice civilization. They tunneled, communicated, and organized, turning soil into structured cities long before vertebrates dreamed of societies. Some scholars call them the planet's first engineers beings, whose collective intelligence arose from instinct rather than thought. Their networks enriched the ground, recycling fallen trees into fertile earth, feeding new growth, and stabilizing the cycle of decay and renewal. The land itself pulsed with their labor, each mound and tunnel a heartbeat in the living architecture of the Carboniferous. The climate sustained their reign. Vast coal forests of club mosses and horsetails blanketed the continents, trapping carbon and feeding the oxygen-rich air that allowed gigantism to flourish. But abundance has its limits. As the Carboniferous gave way to the Permian, the world began to dry. Swamps retreated, oxygen levels fell, and fires grew frequent beneath the canopy. The insect giants dwindled, their colossal forms unable to sustain themselves in thinner air. Yet the empire did not collapse, it transformed. Smaller, more resilient lineages emerged, adapted to scarcity and heat. Evolution had taught them a lesson. Survival belongs to the adaptable, not the immense. Scientists studying fossilized tracheal systems in ancient insects have found that their size was limited not by predation, but by oxygen diffusion. During the Carboniferous, when oxygen reached nearly 35% of the atmosphere, their bodies could sustain vast dimensions. As levels declined to modern proportions, diffusion could no longer meet the metabolic demands of larger forms, forcing miniaturization. This physiological boundary became one of evolution's great regulators, linking the fate of entire species to the breath of the planet itself. Each forest clearing, each fallen trunk, became a microcosm of life in miniature. Beetles evolved to bore through wood, cicadas to sing their territories into the air, and bees much later descendants to choreograph the dance of flowers. The insect's legacy was not size, but system. They connected the roots to the air, the soil to the sky, the decay of death to the rebirth of growth. Their unseen empire wove Earth's first true biosphere, a network of dependencies that outlasted the amphibians and would one day cradle the world of mammals and men. As the continents shifted and inland seas drained away, the air took on a drier scent. Ferns gave way to seed-bearing plants that could endure drought. Insects followed the change, evolving thicker shells, stronger wings, and new strategies for reproduction. Their dominion was everywhere in the wind, the bark, the soil, the petals, but soon another kind of ruler would emerge, not swift of wing, but sealed against desiccation. Not delicate, but enduring. From the small to the armored, from the quick to the eternal, evolution prepared the next inheritors of Earth's throne. The rule of scale, the reptilian revolution. When the wings finally dimmed and the forests began to shrink, silence returned to the canopy. The air, once rich and thick with breath, thinned beneath a harsher Sunday. Pools dried, and roots cracked open the last of the swampy soils. In that silence, something else began slower, heavier, enduring. The age of vast wings was ending, but life's smallest architects were not gone. Beneath the littered ferns and fractured bark, new dynasties stirred quieter, more deliberate, built not on size, but on strategy. As the Carboniferous swamps gave way to drier Permian plains, the balance of life shifted from moisture to muscle. Amphibians, once masters of the shallows, struggled against the desiccating wind. Their gelatinous eggs, so dependent on water, failed in the parched dust. From their ranks, a few lineages evolved a different defense, the amniotic egg, encased in its own microcosm of survival. Inside its toughened shell, a world of membranes, fluids, and breath allowed life to unfold without the mercy of rain. This single innovation, the portable ocean, liberated vertebrates from the tyranny of the water's edge. Sight became their greatest weapon. In the glare of unfiltered sunlight, reptiles evolved eyes tuned to both movement and heat, sensing prey that vanished to others. Their skin, once soft and porous, thickened with keratin, a living shield that reflected the sun's violence. Inside, a revolution unfolded quietly, cold-blooded hearts beating with mechanical precision, metabolisms that conserved energy through stillness rather than speed. It was this economy of life, this mastery of restraint, that allowed them to outlast the storms and silences of a transforming Earth. From those first amniotes, the reptiles emerged, scaled, sealed, and self-contained. Their skin, covered in a mosaic of keratin armor, turned away the sun's bite and the air's theft. Where amphibians withered, reptiles endured, drinking heat and holding it within. In this age of thinning forests and widening deserts, they became creatures of control masters, not only of form, but of function. Bones grew denser, skulls stronger, and jaws capable of delivering crushing force. Fossil beds across what is now South Africa, Russia, and North America preserve this quiet revolution. Paleontologists uncover labyrinthine skulls of the early synapsids Dimetrodon, Edaphosaurus, and their kin, whose tall neural spines once held sails that caught both sun and wind. These were not dinosaurs, but architects of physiology, experimenting with the chemistry of blood and heat. Beneath their scales, capillaries and muscle networks whispered of the first stirrings of warm-bloodedness, an evolutionary gamble that would, millions of years later, give rise to the mammals. The Permian world itself was no longer the lush green of its predecessors. It was a continent of vast interiors, where Pangaea's formation created deserts that stretched for hundreds of miles, rain shadows cut deep into the land, and temperature swings tested the limits of every living thing. In this crucible, reptiles thrived where others failed. Their lungs, larger and more efficient, drew oxygen from thin air. Their kidneys conserved water with ruthless precision. Each adaptation was a lesson written in survival's script: endure or vanish. In the dry riverbeds of what was once Gondwana, trackways show creatures walking with confidence, no longer the sprawled crawl of amphibians, but the purposeful gait of reptiles. Some prints suggest herding behavior, others territorial pursuit. The fossilized mud holds moments of strategy, of interaction, of life beyond mere endurance. It is here that dominance began to take form not in numbers, but in complexity behavior as evolution's newest weapon. By the Middle Permian, this rule of scale had diversified into forms as bizarre as they were brilliant. Some, like parasaurs, carried massive, bony plates along their backs, living citadels that browsed on the sparse vegetation of the desert margins. Others, the therapsids, began to refine motion and metabolism, bridging the cold-blooded slowness of reptiles with the restless warmth of future mammals. Their teeth differentiated incisors, canines, molars, signaling a growing intelligence in the art of consumption. Survival had become not just about endurance, but precision. In the fossil record, microstructures of reptilian bone reveal a story of rising metabolic control. Rings within their tissue, like those of trees, show growth that fluctuated with the seasons, evidence of a world ruled by extremes. Some species adapted by hibernating during drought, others evolved burrowing habits to escape the sun's wrath. Even their hearts and lungs bear the mark of innovation, partial septa dividing the heart's chambers, hinting at more efficient oxygen flow and a step closer to warm-blooded independence. The land itself responded to their dominance. Predation reshaped ecosystems, forcing prey to evolve armor, speed, and stealth. Early herbivores carved the first true terrestrial food webs, recycling the sun's energy through vast inland plains. Forests, now sparser, grew tougher bark and deeper roots to resist both herbivory and heat. The earth was learning resilience from its own creations, and the reptiles were its instructors. Through this rise, the planet seemed to hold its breath. The balance of ecosystems grew intricate, the interdependence fragile yet magnificent. For nearly 40 million years, reptiles reigned as architects of adaptation, spreading across the continents, refining every organ, every motion, every breath for the challenges of a restless world. But within this golden age of control, something unseen gathered in the atmosphere the seeds of collapse. The Permian sun burned brighter, the air turned thinner, and the seas, once teeming with trilobites and corals, began to stagnate. Volcanic eruptions from the Siberian traps released torrents of carbon dioxide and methane, poisoning skies and oceans alike. Reptiles, for all their mastery of the dry land, could not command the chemistry of the world itself. One by one, ecosystems faltered. Forests fell silent. Rivers ran dry. Yet, even as extinction's shadow lengthened, the lessons of scale would persist. The architecture of eggs, the efficiency of lungs, the strength of bone, these would outlast the world that birthed them. Evolution, patient and unsentimental, would build again from what survived. From the brilliance of their reign would come the silence of their fall, and in that silence the earth prepared for its greatest reckoning. The Empire of Giants, the Age of Titans. When the world quieted after the dying, time began again. From the silence that followed ruin, forests grew tall, seas teemed anew, and the earth inhaled deeply. Out of this rebirth came creatures that defied proportion, as if life, unbound at last, sought to reclaim the scale of its dreams. What had once crept and clung to survival now strode across continents. The planet, warmed and rich with green, offered abundance, and in that generosity, size became power. Across the wide plains of the Jurassic, the ground itself seemed alive. Great herds of sauropods moved through fern forests like living continents, each step a small tremor, each breath a gust of ancient wind. Their necks, as long as riverbeds, arched into the canopies to strip trees of their crowns, while tails stretched behind them like whips of shadow. They were gravity-embodied, creatures that remade the landscape through presence alone. The air was heavy then, rich with oxygen and moisture. Ferns reached the height of buildings, cycads and conifers shaded valleys, and the climate pulsed with humid warmth. Gigantism was not a whim, but a strategy. A larger body could retain heat, travel farther, and outlive drought. It could browse higher, digest slower, and survive the shifting balance of seasons. Evolution, no longer constrained by scarcity, experimented with magnitude. The bones of these titans reveal the secret of their endurance. Inside those vast frames lay a lattice of air, not stone hollow bones threaded with sacs that lightened their mass and fueled their colossal lung. Their hearts, the size of cars, pumped blood upward with unimaginable force, feeding brains that scarcely needed to think, only to endure. Theirs was not a clever reign, but a steady one, a pact between gravity and breath. Each step was a negotiation between weight and will. Far from the plains, another realm answered this surge of scale. Beneath the rolling seas, giants of another kind claimed their dominion. Ichthyosaurs, sleek as torpedoes, coursed through the ancient oceans, their forms tuned to speed and precision. Pliosaurs, vast and muscular, ruled as the undisputed hunters of the deep, jaws capable of crushing anything that strayed into their reach. Above the reefs, plesiosaurs glided like serpentine ghosts, long necks weaving through schools of fish that flashed like living light. The ocean was no longer a refuge, but an empire, ruled by predators that carried the strength of the land into the water. It was in these oceans that life perfected the art of movement. Fins evolved from ancient limbs, bones reshaped for flight through liquid, eyes adapted to the darkness of depth. Fossilized skeletons, preserved in seabed stone, record their mastery vertebrae, articulated with precision, skulls streamlined for pressure and pursuit. The marine world was a gallery of engineered power, every form a response to the hunger and vastness of the deep. The sea had learned to breathe through speed. In the skies, too, the empire expanded. Pterosaurs, born from the same reptilian lineage, claimed the air as their kingdom. Their wings, stretched skin over elongated fingers, caught the thermals above coastal cliffs and forests where the winds were strong. Some were no larger than gulls, flitting over shorelines for insects and fish, while others, like Quetzalcoatlus, spanned the length of a small plain, soaring from continent to continent on currents invisible to the eye. The sky, for the first time, belonged to vertebrates. What united these realms, land, sea, and sky, was not simply scale, but structure. To grow was to innovate. The physiology of the giants was a feat of engineering as much as evolution. Respiratory systems borrowed from birds, circulatory networks that could sustain tons of living tissue, digestive machinery designed to convert forests into endurance. Paleontologists, studying their bones, find clues to metabolisms that balanced between reptile and bird, between cold blood and warm. These were creatures in transition, not static rulers, but experiments in the architecture of life itself. The world they ruled was equally transformed. The continents of Pangaea began to break apart, splitting the supercontinent into new lands divided by young oceans. Volcanic ridges rose and fell, releasing carbon and ash that thickened the atmosphere and warmed the globe. Rivers carved fresh valleys, and mountain chains lifted into view where none had stood before. This tectonic restlessness created diversity, new coastlines for marine reptiles, new plains for herbivores, new climates for predators. The empire of giants was not confined to a place, but to a time when the earth's own motion seemed to mirror their restlessness. Yet even in their strength, fragility lingered. The very scale that sustained them required constant abundance, endless foliage, endless prey, endless balance. When the climate shifted again, when volcanic winters or oceanic anoxia dulled the world's productivity, these enormous bodies became burdens. Some species dwindled, others adapted into smaller forms. But within this vastness, intelligence stirred in new forms. Smaller predators, faster and more alert, began to thrive at the edges of the giants' domains. Early mammals hid in burrows, darting out under the cover of night. Feathered reptiles hunted in packs, testing strategies that depended not on size but on coordination. It was the first hint that the rule of scale would not last forever, that in the shadow of giants, evolution was preparing another kind of power. Still, the world of titans left an indelible mark. Their bones shaped the geology of legend. Their weight pressed footprints into stone that would survive hundreds of millions of years. The ecosystems they built, the forests trimmed by their reach, the coastlines sculpted by their passing, became the foundation for everything that followed. Even in extinction, they defined the possible. Life had proven that the planet could bear giants, and in doing so, it had tested the limits of strength itself. As the Jurassic world aged and its balance began to tilt, the empire of size began to fracture. Forests changed, seas cooled, skies thickened with ash. From the bones of the great came the birth of the specialized creatures, designed not for mass, but for mastery. In their shadow, new hunters and thinkers began to move. From size to specialization, evolution turned its gaze toward the ones who would refine power rather than merely possess it. The tyrant lineage, apex predators of the Cretaceous. In the wake of the giants, movement became mastery. Strength condensed into precision. What once ruled by weight, now ruled by will. Across the plains and forests of the Cretaceous, predators honed their craft's speed, sight, and strategy, replacing sheer magnitude. Among them rose the tyrants, creatures shaped by purpose and perfected by time. The age of colossal herbivores had created an arms race of survival. With each new generation of massive prey, predators evolved tools to match them. Muscles coiled with efficiency, jaws narrowed for focus, and teeth became instruments of both strength and surgical violence. The fossil record reveals this slow engineering of perfection. Claw marks etched in bone, healed wounds that speak of failed hunts, and the silent geometry of footprints frozen in ash. Each trace is a record of adaptation, proof of evolution's relentless refinement of design. At the pinnacle of this lineage stood Tyrannosaurus rex, a creature whose anatomy embodied balance between raw power and calculated function. Its skull, more than a meter long, housed muscles capable of generating a bite force exceeding 35,000 newtons, enough to crush bone with ease. Beneath its skin, pneumatic cavities lightened its frame, allowing mobility that belied its mass. The forelimbs, though reduced, were not vestigial. Their robust joints and claws may have anchored prey during feeding. Every detail of its body, from the forward-facing eyes that granted depth perception to the tail that counterweighted its stride, tells a story of evolutionary precision sculpted across millions of years. But the tyrant was not alone. The Cretaceous world teemed with predators that explored other forms of dominance. Dromaeosaurs, the lineage that included Velociraptor, refined speed and coordination. Their sickle-shaped claws were designed not for killing, but for holding. A grappling hook that kept struggling prey pinned as jaws and teeth did their work. Feathers, once tools of insulation or display, became extensions of agility stabilizers, for running, gliding, or turning mid-leap. Where T, Rex conquered by force, raptors triumphed through tactics. Their skulls reveal large olfactory bulbs and expanded brain cases, evidence of heightened senses and complex behavior. Paleontologists have uncovered trackways that show raptors moving in parallel, suggesting possible cooperative hunting or territorial display. Though direct proof of pack behavior remains debated, the evidence of intelligence is clear. These were not instinct-driven engines of hunger, but adaptive, reactive creatures capable of learning from the landscape and the struggle within it. The Cretaceous was not only an age of size, it was an age of strategy. The ecosystems that nurtured them were intricate and evolving. Across Laramidia, the western landmass of North America, humid floodplains and cyclical droughts created a patchwork of opportunity and scarcity. Herds of Triceratops, Edmontosaurus, and Ankylosaurus moved through fern prairies and river deltas, shaping predator behavior. Tyrannosaurs adapted to this changing geography by expanding their range and dietary flexibility. Isotope analysis from fossilized teeth shows shifts between prey species across regions and seasons, revealing a predator with the intelligence to exploit patterns of migration and abundance. In Asia, forms such as Tarbosaurus bataar mirrored their North American relatives, while smaller tyrannosaurids, like Alioramus, specialized in speed and pursuit. These regional variants reflect how geography and climate could sculpt even apex predators into distinct evolutionary expressions. The Cretaceous was a world of continents in motion, and its life mirrored that restless drift each population tuned to its environment's demands, each lineage a local experiment in power. Even the skies bore witness to the new order. Pterosaurs, though not dinosaurs, shared the same arenas of dominance, evolving wingspans that stretched over 10 meters in species like Quetzalcoatlus northropi. While tyrants ruled the ground, these aerial giants ruled the thermal winds above, scanning for carcasses or prey from the air. The coexistence of massive flyers and terrestrial hunters created an ecosystem where death was recycled efficiently, the fallen of one species feeding the rise of another. It was a world in perfect ecological tension. For all its wonder, the age stood on fragile ground. Fossil pollen and marine sediment cores from the late Cretaceous record a slow global shift fluctuations in sea level, volcanic carbon emissions from the Deccan traps, and a creeping climate instability that began to erode ecosystems. Coastal plains narrowed, forests fragmented, and inland deserts expanded. The giants persisted, but their dominion grew thinner, more precarious. Evolution had sharpened them for supremacy, but not for sudden catastrophe. Tyrannosaurs and raptors alike bore the burden of specialization. Their success depended on vast prey populations and stable climates. When ecosystems began to fluctuate, their finely tuned adaptations became vulnerabilities. The fossil beds at Hell Creek and Nemegt tell the story of abundance followed by absent skeletons preserved in floodplain silt, layers that suddenly thin, then vanish into sterile clay. The rhythm of predation, once constant and assured, faltered as food chains collapsed. But in these same sediments lie traces of resilience burrows of small mammals, fossilized seeds, the impressions of ferns reclaiming scorched earth. The fall of the great predators was not immediate, but gradual, drawn out over thousands of years before the final strike from the heavens sealed their fate. When the asteroid struck at Chicxulub 66 million years ago, releasing energy 1 billion times greater than the Hiroshima bomb, it was not merely the end of a dynasty, but the conclusion of a biological principle. That power alone ensures survival. The impact sent shockwaves through every living system. Fires consumed continents. The sky darkened beneath a veil of sulfur and soot. Photosynthesis halted. Food chains crumbled. For months, perhaps years, darkness reigned. The last tyrants, whether T, Rex or Tarbosaurus, likely died not from the blast itself, but from the collapse that followed starvation, cold, and silence where once the plains had thundered with life. Yet extinction, in deep time, is not only an ending, but a resetting of the evolutionary stage. The predators that had perfected the art of dominance gave way to forms that would redefine it. In the ashes of their empire, warmth stirred in the undergrowth small nocturnal creatures with beating hearts and quick minds. They were not yet conquerors, but survivors, inheritors of a world cleansed by fire and shadowed by memory. The mammalian dawn, shadows after the fire. When the fires died and the roar of the giants faded, the earth exhaled into darkness. The air thickened with soot, and sunlight became memory. In the long winter that followed, warmth meant survival, and in that warmth, a lineage stirred. Beneath the ash and silence, in burrows and roots, the small ones endured. They were not the rulers of their age, but the keepers of its spark. The catastrophe that ended the Cretaceous began with light brighter than any dawn. A fragment of space 10 kilometers wide struck the Yucatan Peninsula with the energy of billions of atomic bombs. Shockwaves encircled the planet. Tsunamis scoured coastlines and molten rock fell like rain. Then came the dark, a global winter born from vaporized stone and carbon. Photosynthesis collapsed, forests burned, oceans acidified. For creatures dependent on abundance and sun, it was the end. For those who had learned to live small, it was an opportunity. Mammals, the overlooked shadows of the Mesozoic, had long prepared for a world of instability. They had already evolved warm blood, insulating fur, and the ability to nurse their young traits that did not seek dominance, but endurance. In the chaos that followed the asteroid, these adaptations became salvation. While reptiles and giant herbivores perished under the cold and hunger, mammals turned inward, surviving in leaf litter, in tunnels, in the safety of the night. Their small bodies demanded little. Their metabolisms made warmth from scarcity. In fossil layers from North America, Asia, and the southern continents, paleontologists trace this quiet continuity. Below the iridium-rich clay that marks the impact, dinosaur bones vanish. Above it, tiny jaws and teeth of early mammals appear in abundance. Genera like Periptychus, Ectoconus, and Protungulatum emerged within a few 100,000 years of the extinction, feeding on seeds, carrion, and insects in landscapes stripped of giants. The fossil record, compressed into millimeters of sediment, speaks of survival through adaptability, not strength, but resilience encoded in bone and form. As the atmosphere cleared and green returned to the world, these survivors began to explore the niches left empty. Forests grew back in patchwork, seas receded, and the climate stabilized into the Paleocene. Mammals diversified with astonishing speed. Within less than 10 million years, their descendants ranged from shrew-sized insectivores to creatures larger than horses. Evolution, freed from the gravitational pull of dinosaur dominance, accelerated into an explosion of forms. Herbivores evolved high-crowned teeth to grind new foliage. Carnivores sharpened theirs for pursuit. In the fossil beds of Wyoming's Bighorn Basin and the Gobi Desert, entire ecosystems of mammals unfolded layer by layer, each stratum recording the expansion of life into unclaimed worlds. Anatomically, the mammalian brain began its great ascent. The neocortex, the seat of perception and decision, expanded relative to body size. This neurological bloom allowed complex behavior, memory, social coordination, and learning from experience. Sensory refinement followed. Olfactory lobes enlarged to read the world through scent. Auditory bones, once part of reptilian jaws, became fine instruments of hearing. These were not mere physical adaptations, but cognitive revolutions. Intelligence, once scattered across the tree of life, found a stable foundation within the mammalian skull. As evolution advanced into the Eocene, warmth enveloped the planet again. Tropical forests reached into polar latitudes, and mammals diversified into lineages that would shape the continents for tens of millions of years. Ungulates filled plains and valleys. Early primates swung through canopies of vast jungles. Whales returned to the sea, transforming limbs into flippers and lungs into instruments of depth. Fossil sequences from Pakistan reveal Pachycetus, a creature walking the shores between two worlds, a symbol of mammalian ingenuity, where adaptability became identity. But survival did not come without cost. The age that followed the dinosaurs' fall was one of experimentation and extinction in equal measure. Many early lineages, like the creodonts, once dominant carnivores, vanished, replaced by others more efficient. Climate oscillations reshaped the face of Earth, from global warmth to sudden cold snaps, from lush forests to spreading grasslands. Mammals responded with endless innovation: new teeth for grazing, longer limbs for running, complex social structures for shared protection. Their story was one of transformation shaped by flux, a dialogue between biology and environment that refined the art of endurance. Evidence from isotopic analysis and sediment cores tells of changing carbon cycles and shifting ocean currents. The recovery of plant life increased oxygen levels and stabilized atmospheric composition, supporting higher metabolic rates. This geochemical rebalancing made possible the energetic demands of mammals' warm-blooded physiology. Their internal heat, once a liability in the time of dinosaurs, became their greatest strength in the cooler, more variable climates of the Cenozoic. Through physiology and behavior, they transcended the rhythm of the sun, thriving in darkness and cold, in mountains and tundra. In the microfossils of teeth and the subtle geometry of bones, paleontologists read not just survival, but strategy. Growth rings in fossilized bone reveal bursts of activity during favorable seasons, pauses during scarcity, the signature of creatures synchronized with an unpredictable planet. Trace fossils show evidence of burrows, dens, and nests, the architecture of care and continuity. Here, in the smallest details, the foundations of social life began: cooperation, parental protection, and memory of place. Evolution was no longer a race of size or might, but of connection and learning. The mammalian dawn marked more than a recovery. It was the redefinition of what it meant to rule. Life no longer sought dominance through scale or spectacle. It began to measure success in subtlety, in heat retained, in offspring guarded, in minds attuned to change. The age of thunder had ended, and in its silence, heartbeat replaced footstep as the measure of power. By the late Paleocene, ecosystems flourished again, with diversity unseen since the Mesozoic. Predators stalked forests on padded feet, herbivores grazed in open light, and nocturnal eyes watched from beneath ferns. The night, once a refuge, became a realm of its own, a world sculpted by perception and persistence. From these shadows, the lineages of primates, carnivores, and ungulates set forth the blueprint of modern life. And yet this was only a prologue. The mammalian inheritance was not to remain small forever. In the epochs to come, their descendants would grow into titans of fur and tusks, into architects of thought and tool. The quiet triumph born in ash would become a symphony of adaptation, an empire not of thunder, but of endurance. The age of beasts, mammalian empires. The air carried new voices, low bellows, trumpeting calls, and the rumble of hooves over widening plains. Where silence once ruled, thunder answered. The world had grown vast again, and in its open spaces, power found new forms. From tundra to jungle, the beasts of the Cenozoic rose in endless variety, each one a testament to what endurance could become when given time. In the Paleocene, Earth was still rebuilding. Forests thickened under the warmth of a healing atmosphere, and the small nocturnal survivors of the extinction began to fill the vacant niches left by reptilian dominion. Fossil beds in North America and Asia reveal early forms such as Pantalambda and Coryphodon stout, hoofed herbivores that moved cautiously through dense foliage. Their teeth, broad and ridged, spoke of adaptation to tough plant matter, while their size hinted at the return of ecological balance. Evolution, no longer constrained by the giants of the Mesozoic, began to experiment again. By the Eocene, that experimentation reached exuberance. Temperatures climbed to one of the warmest intervals in Cenozoic history, and lush rainforests stretched from pole to pole. Mammals diversified into shapes that mirrored every possible way of life: tree dwellers, swimmers, runners, grazers, and hunters. Fossil evidence from sites like Messel in Germany and the Green River Formation in Wyoming shows ecosystems alive with form and function. Basilosaurus, a whale the length of a bus, ruled the oceans, while early horses such as Eohippus trotted through fern-filled forests no taller than a fox. Even bats had already taken to the skies, their wings adapted for night navigation, guided by primitive echolocation. Across the continents, the shifting of plates and the rearrangement of ocean currents orchestrated the rhythm of life. The early Cenozoic saw the widening of the Atlantic and the isolation of Australia and South America, creating distinct evolutionary theatres. With the closure of seaways like the Tethys, atmospheric circulation patterns changed. These movements are traced in oxygen isotope data from marine sediments. As climate stabilized into warmth and predictability, mammalian populations expanded, spreading across emerging land bridges and transforming isolated ecosystems into vast, interconnected biomes. This was an age of innovation written in anatomy. Warm-blooded metabolism allowed constant motion. Differentiated teeth enabled specialized diets, and advanced parental care increased survival. In this world, mammals became architects of ecosystems, shaping vegetation and influencing climate through their feeding and movement. The fossilized soils and isotopic records of this time reveal cycles of expansion and migration, biological feedback loops that drove landscapes into continual change. Then, the balance shifted again. Around 34 million years ago, global cooling began. Ice accumulated on Antarctica, and sea levels fell. The Eocene's green corridors gave way to open woodlands and spreading grasslands. With them came new forms of life built for endurance and speed. The Oligocene introduced recognizable ancestors of today's fauna: Paraceratherium, the largest land mammal ever known, towering over 5 meters at the shoulder, nimrovids and early cats, refining the art of the hunt, and the first true primates, whose increasing brain size hinted at futures yet unseen. The Miocene transformed the planet into a theatre of expansion. Grasses, enriched by silica, covered continents in vast savannas that favoured grazers with high-crowned teeth. Fossils of Merychippus and Pliohippus mark the evolution of efficient runners, their limbs lengthened, their hooves solidified for open terrain. Herbivores such as Gomphotherium and Danatherium roamed in herds, sculpting the landscape through migration and grazing. Predators evolved alongside them, nimble hyenodonts, giving way to true carnivores, canids and felids that perfected pursuit and ambush. Each step, each generation, refined the equilibrium between hunter and prey. Across continents, tectonics redrew the map of life. The collision of Africa and Eurasia connected land bridges, driving waves of migration. North and South America exchanged species, reshaping ecosystems from pampas to prairies. The Himalayas rose, altering atmospheric circulation and accelerating monsoon patterns. These geological movements are recorded in marine sediments and fossil distributions, linking Earth's physical heartbeat to the story of biological empire. Evolution was not merely biological, it was continental. The Pliocene opened with climates fluctuating between warmth and chill. Mammoths and mastodons expanded across northern latitudes, their heavy fur and layered fat preparing them for encroaching ice. Saber-toothed cats, like Smilodon fatalis, honed precision, killing with jaw mechanics, capable of delivering fatal strikes to thick-skinned prey. In Africa, the rise of open habitats favored endurance hunters and cooperative predators, while herbivores grew taller and faster to navigate endless plains. The fossil record of La Brea and Olduvai preserves these confrontations, moments frozen in tar and stone, snapshots of an arms race measured in muscle and adaptation. By the Pleistocene, the pattern had reached grandeur. Ice advanced and retreated in cycles, driving migrations and extinctions. Gigantism re-emerged as a response to cold, woolly rhinoceroses, ground sloths, and armored glyptodonts roaming across permafrost and tundra. Genetic studies reveal rapid speciation during these climatic oscillations, proof of evolution's responsiveness to instability. Each glacial breath sculpted both species and behavior, and beneath the auroras of the north, entire ecosystems shifted like slow tides of life and death. The age of mammals was not only an age of size, it was an age of strategy. Complex social behavior, communication, and intelligence became survival tools as critical as claws or tusks. Herd structures in proboscideans and cooperative hunts in predators reflect neurological sophistication evidence found in endocasts and bone microstructures that reveal enlarged neocortices and refined sensory pathways. Life no longer simply reacted to the environment, it began to predict, to plan. Even in splendor, the shadow of impermanence remained. Climate continued to swing. Glaciers expanded once more, and with them came extinctions that erased entire lineages. But what endured were the qualities that defined mammals' adaptability, cognition, and resilience. From tundra to jungle, from plains to ice, they had inherited the earth and made it complex again. From motion came awareness, and from awareness, thought. Curiosity stirred behind the eyes of creatures who observed the world not only to survive, but to understand it. Evolution, once measured in muscle, now began to measure itself in memory. Giants of the ice, the rain before memory. Across a dimming world, the warmth that had once nurtured sprawling forests and endless plains began to fade. The air sharpened, the winds turned relentless, and snow fell where rain had ruled for millennia. Vast sheets of ice crept from the poles, grinding continents beneath their slow, crushing weight. The earth entered a new rhythm, a cycle of freeze and release that would sculpt the face of every land and test the endurance of every living thing. As glaciers spread across the north, the planet's pulse slowed. Great rivers froze into silence, and mountains vanished beneath walls of ice, a kilometre thick. Where sunlight still reached, life condensed into pockets of resilience, the mammoth steppe, stretching from Western Europe to Alaska, a frozen empire of grass, wind, and bone. It was the largest biome on Earth, home to creatures whose size defied the hunger of the cold. Across these latitudes, atmospheric carbon dioxide had fallen to less than 190 parts per million, one of the lowest concentrations in the last 800,000 years, driving feedback loops that deepened glaciation and extended the reach of the permafrost. Long after the age of reptiles and the dominion of early mammals, a new breed of giants emerged wrapped in fur, built for endurance and carved by necessity. The woolly mammoth, Mammuthus primigenius, towered above the tundra, its curved tusks tracing arcs older than history. Beneath its thick coat lay layers of fat, each centimetre a memory of survival through icebound seasons. Beside it wandered herds of steppe bison, musk oxen, and wild horses, their hooves cracking the frost-hardened ground in rhythmic procession. To the north, predators followed. The saber-toothed cats, last of a long lineage of specialized hunters, thrived on the abundance of flesh that roamed the steppes. Smilodon fatalis and its kin struck with the precision of living weapons. Their massive canines built not for tearing, but for killing cleanly. A single thrust into the arteries of giants. Cave lions stalked in pairs across the permafrost, their bones now found deep within frozen caverns that echo with the stillness of 30,000 years. Among the shadows of these predators moved early humans not yet masters of their world, but observers shaped by it. Homo erectus had given way to Homo neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens, each adapted to cold in its own way. They built shelters of bone and hide, kindled fire against the endless night, and carved symbols into ivory and stone. Theirs was an existence of awe and dependence, surrounded by beings that dwarfed them in strength, but not in endurance. In this world, intellect became survival's newest form. Far beyond the frozen plains, in regions untouched by ice, ecosystems told a different story. In the southern continents, Africa, Australia, and South America, warmth lingered. But the age of giants came all the same. The woolly rhinoceros roamed across Eurasia, the ground sloth, Megatherium americanum, towered over the grasslands of South America, marsupial lions hunted in the forests of Ice Age Australia. The world was divided not by climate alone, but by the rhythms of adaptation. Each continent became an experiment in endurance, sculpted by isolation and ice, where rivers froze and thawed with the turning of the glacial cycles. Migrations became the heartbeat of survival. Mammoths walked thousands of kilometers across the steppe in search of exposed grasslands, leaving paths that would one day guide humans through the same terrain. Genetic evidence, recovered from permafrost, tells its story, a record written in ancient DNA, preserved beneath layers of ice that still remember their tread. Through these molecular fossils, scientists have reconstructed their lineage. The steppe mammoth giving rise to the woolly, which endured until barely 4,000 years ago, when a few remained on Wrangel Island, ghosts of an age the world had forgotten. At the edges of the ice sheets, where tundra met forest, evolution worked with quiet precision. Species shrank to conserve energy, coats thickened, and senses sharpened. Birds adapted their migrations to the changing skies, while wolves evolved into cooperative hunters' ancestors of those that would someday guard human fires. Even insects and mosses played their part, stabilizing fragile soils and capturing sunlight in a landscape that knew little of warmth. Every organism was a response to scarcity, every adaptation a testimony to endurance. Once, during the height of the last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago, ice covered nearly a third of Earth's surface. The global temperature had dropped by as much as 6 degrees Celsius, and sea levels were over 120 meters lower than today. Continents expanded into bridges, Beringia between Asia and North America, Doggerland between Britain and Europe. Through these frozen corridors, life moved, humans, herds, and predators, tracing the geography of survival. What would later become myth began as a migration. Here, life learned to exist not in defiance of the cold, but because of it. The ecosystems of the Ice Age were stable yet fragile, balanced upon the rhythms of glaciation and retreat. Carbon trapped in frozen soils, methane sealed in permafrost, these were the invisible forces that would one day shape the climate's memory. To the creatures that lived then, the ice was not a barrier, but the very foundation of their world. The cold did not rage, it simply waited, and life withdrew. As the ice receded and the air grew wetter and warmer, the vast grasslands that had fed the giants disappeared. Forests reclaimed the tundra, and with them came scarcity. The great mammoths, mastodons, and saber-toothed cats found themselves stranded in time, their size no longer a strength but a burden. Whether by changing climate, overhunting, or both, the giants fell, and the silence that followed was the sound of an era ending. Radiocarbon dating, of the youngest mammoth remains shows isolated populations surviving into the mid-Holocene, their genomes, marked by inbreeding and mutational collapse, a biological echo of a world unraveling in slow motion. In the thaw that followed, rivers cut through glacial valleys, revealing bones and tools side by side, the remains of a covenant between survival and awareness. Humanity stepped out from the cold, carrying memory, story, and fire. The world's dominion had shifted once more, not through strength or size, but through the quiet, enduring power of thought. Across the ages, the earth has worn many crowns. Oceans, forests, and skies, once answered to rulers, now turn to dust empires of fin, claw, and bone, each shaping the world in its own brief dominion. Yet nothing endures forever. The planet simply turns, and new life claims the throne. We are only the latest dream in Earth's long, restless mind. Like, subscribe, and keep exploring the ancient realms that came before us. The story of life is far from over.